But what we are hearing now, Mr. Daly, is a willingness, the two sides, to find the common ground and at least talk to one another about cooperation and coordination. Mr. Daly.
Right, I think that's the importance of the visit. As you suggest, the things that State Councilor Yang said and that President Trump said, this is standard diplomatic language that doesn't commit either side to anything, but at least expresses a willingness to keep working at the engagement or cooperative side of the relationship. At the same time, I think that both sides see growing tensions, not only strategic tensions, especially in the Western Pacific, but in the prior half of your program, you talked about the economic issues. And then what's new, and what I think is new certainly since the Shanghai Communique was signed, is that both sides are now interested in leading regional and world orders based on, at times, very different sets of values and very different sets of goals. Even in terms of world order, there are areas of cooperation and mutual benefit, but there are also growing areas of tension. So it's very important to have this early meeting, I think, between the State Councilor and the President and his team.
Mr. Yang, you want to have your take here?
Yes, it's a typical diplomatic wordings sent from both sides, but the similar wordings from both sides reflects the common ground for cooperation and coordination. Such a typical diplomatic words, both they used by the two sides, really reflects the sincerity from both capitals, especially before this visit, before this meeting, the two presidents from Beijing and Washington had a very long and warm chattings through a phone call. They set up the basic tones and basic principles for cooperation and coordination. So basically, from now on, the cooperation and coordination can be the common key words from both sides.
Two C's, of course. I hope it brings a lot of vitamin vitamin C as well to the bilateral relations. Having said that, though, I think the most important thing is, where is the common ground? Remember, the two countries was smart enough 45 years ago to find its own common ground, even though they are so ideologically different, even during the Cold War. So, Mr. Daly, where is the common ground? Can the two sides work with one another to find it? Is this the right time? I mean, after all, it's already the biggest and the second largest economy.
Right. I think that we certainly can see common ground in improving the trade and investment relations between the two countries. This is an area where, as your previous guests suggested, there really is room to change some of the terms of trade and terms of investment in both countries. At the same time, we can't wish away growing strategic distrust between the two nations, which is definitely there. And we do see signs that the leaders of both countries, Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, see this relationship, even though they speak a lot about cooperation and are sincere insofar as they go, they also see this relationship in more adversarial terms than their predecessors did. And as I mentioned, China is, in many ways, very understandably, trying to increase its international influence, trying to shape institutions and practices. And the United States has been the primary shaper of the world order since World War II. And we see growing friction between what's sometimes called the more liberal Western order and less liberal international practices put forward by China, by Russia, in some cases by India and others. So this, I think, remains a tipping point in the relationship. We've committed now to cooperation and to trying to find common ground, but that cannot just erase distrust.
Right, but then recognizing distrust is only, there is the distrust, is only the first step. The question is how to solve it. I think that's all we have right in front of us. Mr. Yang, let's find some spotlight to see whether it could work. For example, security issues, Korean Peninsula. We understand the Vice Minister of DPRK is now visiting China for almost a week, still a few days to go. Latest development going on, and certainly it could be a legacy issue for President Trump if he can work on this. Can that be an area? You've been a DPRK expert for a long time, so tell us whether it could be a possibility.
Well, yes, common ground and contradictions. The common ground is both China and the U.S. Seek for a real denuclearization on the whole peninsula. no differences between the two capitals. But the contradiction is the approaches. And
Explain, please.
U.S. Wanted to bring about the denuclearization as a goal by pressure tools. Introducing U.S. Rhetoric, say, carrots and steak,
Right.
U.S. prefer steaks. So the problem is they have neither big enough steak nor enough carrots to solve this issue.
Right.
But for China, steak, no. U.S. say all options are on the table, but China say all options but military on the table. So that is the difference on the approaches.
Of course, China is the neighbor of DPRK.
Yeah.
The concern is well understood, and also what the united so-called the Korean Peninsula would mean for the whole region is a huge question mark. Mr. Daly, is that hope that there can be one area can U.S. throw away to a certain extent, only talking about the stick?
Well, no, the U.S., I think, under President Trump, and it probably would have been true under President Clinton as well, does want to use every means at its disposal, as Professor Yang has just suggested. And the carrots are the potential for dialogue, which China has always been advocating, in my view, correctly, and which candidate Trump had said that he might be open to, a dialogue with Korea. At the same time, there is a factor of time here in that North Korea is improving its capabilities, and it is developing the ability to put a nuclear weapon on an intercontinental ballistic missile that can reach the United States. And that means that it is an extremely urgent matter for the United States, and the sticks come into play. And one kind of stick that the United States is using is the use of anti-ballistic missile systems like the THAAD system, which is scheduled to be deployed in South Korea. Now, that hasn't happened yet, and South Korea has an election coming up. But we do know that the deployments of these kinds of systems is of highest concern to the Beijing government. And there will be those in the American government who think that China's worry about United States systems is actually a form of leverage.
Right.
So I think we'll continue to see sanctions. I hope we will see dialogue, but there is also a possibility of more deployments as well.
The question really is, Mr. Yang, before we're finding the common ground, the so-called, are we gonna already going into the battleground?
Well, common ground, strategically, both China and the U.S. really share an obvious common ground that can summarize as two items: a real peace and stability,
Right.
because neither of the two sides like to go to war battlefield. Both China and U.S. hope the Asia Pacific as a peaceful area. And number two, sustainable prosperity. So peace and prosperity, so that two big countries can make joint adventure to make money in this region.
Okay,
so that is the common ground.
But that is interesting because, Mr. Daly, it is not limited just to the DPRK nuclear issue, but also other issues as well. For example, about the South China Sea and some of the other controversial issues between the two countries. That is whether, at this point, the United States still want peace and stability vis-a-vis relations with China. After all, China is the rising power, U.S. is the incumbent power. China is the apprentice in the current position, while U.S. has been in that position for a long time, fighting against whoever is the second. It used to be Japan, it used to be some of the other countries. So the question is, what exactly is U.S.
we're
intention?
not quite that bloody-minded. We haven't been fighting against everybody.
Go ahead, Mr. Daly.
Well, I think both you and Professor Yang point to this interesting question of what is the positive basis for constructive U.S.-China relations going forward. Yes, we all want to avoid war. We want to avoid the Thucydides trap. Avoidance of war is a negative kind of motivation. But what is the positive, forward-thinking, cooperative motivation that can really carry the day in light of different strategies and different ideologies? And this is most sharply in focus, as I see it, in the South China Sea and in the Western Pacific, where we have what appear to be incommensurate, really contrasting views of what the role of international law should be and of what constitutes stability.
Right.
That's going to be a long time working out. I don't see either side changing its views soon. I think that there are other parts of the world where we could do more to work together and to find common cause. In Africa, in Central Asia, I think that China is providing ever more global public goods, and that this is something that the United States could be more active in welcoming. Some of China's investments through the AIIB, potentially through One Belt, One Road, if these are high quality investments. I think the United States could do a lot to signal to China that these contributions are welcome globally. That America supports them and would like to participate.
Mr. Daly, you realize that you have just made some statement about some extremely important, possibly, improvements of relations when you answer that question.
I think that China, too, this is not just, some of my Chinese friends speak as though this is all about Trump and what's Trump going to do, and as though Trump caused the friction. A lot of the frictions in U.S.-China relations are long-term, and some of them have also been caused or exacerbated on the Chinese side. I think it would also be very helpful if President Xi could put down his anti-Western, anti-American rhetoric and recognize that the United States, far from containing China, has made an essential contribution to China's rise and to China's growth. And if we could both back away from rhetoric and focus on the positive, we might be able to find the diplomatic space we need.
Mr. Yang, you want to respond?
Well, there have been a lot of obstacles for the bilateral relation. Among them, the most important thing is the mutual strategic suspicions from both sides. So so we need to make joint efforts to reduce the mutual suspicions so that we can go into get on to business. A lot of potential business has been blocked by the ideological and psychological distrusts and suspicions. So I think the high level and the every level exchanges will play more and more useful role to reduce such suspicions.
And that, of course, has been stated in the statement put out by the Chinese side after Chinese State Councilor Yang Xiyu met with U.S. President Donald Trump just a few hours ago. And before we go, once again, I want to go back 45 years ago. I mean, the negotiations between the Shanghai Communique was signed has been long. There has been so much back and forth behind the scenes. But now these days, it's almost impossible. I mean, Mr. Daly, you know this better than I do. So under the current circumstances, what can the two sides' leadership work together and yet not publicly not reflect their spars toward one another? I think that is very important for the confidence. Briefly from you before we wrap up.
Yeah. Well, it's right. So we do need more high-level meetings. I agree entirely with Professor Yang. But one of the things that makes this difficult is that both President Xi and President Trump tend not to work through their foreign affairs bureaucracies. They're suspicious of those, and both leaders surround themselves with a small group of trusted advisors. That makes the kind of regular, deep, broad communication between the two sides, which we need. It makes it harder to carry out. So I think that we need a different process in which the bureaucracies are empowered to be in regular, meaningful contact with each other. Leaders' meetings are important, but they're not enough.
You can tell Mr. Daly has been working with the bureaucracy for a long time. Mr. Yang, of course, the inspirations for next step, where does it come from, is very important. Finally for you.
Well, as early as possible, summit between the two sides will be necessary and will be important, and both in bilateral occasion or multilateral occasion. For example, Trump may pay a visit to East Asia, Japan, South Korea, maybe China, or some multilateral platform like G20 or APEC. And the summit will settle down the framework for the development of bilateral.